Today's webinar, 5 Strategies for a Smooth Transition from Virtual to In-Person Learning, is sponsored by ELB Learning. Our speaker today is Carrie Wiser, and Carrie is the Senior Strategist and Learning Experience Designer for ELB Learning. Carrie partners with clients to ideate and build authentic, engaging, and executable learning experiences. She conducts analysis and interviews to map out needs, competencies, and content, then designs learning experiences that reflect how our brains work and what people actually need to do. Her goal is to foster meaningful connections that help people remember and apply what they learn. So you end up with innovative training that improves retention and performance. Carrie has worked over 20 years in a variety of industries, including Fortune 500 corporations and small businesses, federal and nonprofit organizations, and higher education. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Carrie. And Carrie, when you're ready, go ahead and start sharing your screen.
Thank you, Karen. Hi, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share.
Great. We're seeing your screen. Thanks, Sherry.
Okay. So basically what we're going to talk about today is just the fact that I think we're all dealing with the fact that companies are returning to the office and everybody is in a different situation and we're not all sure how that's going to look. But we're all getting more and more requests to go back, not only into the office, but to transition back from what we might have had before, which was a lot of video-based instructor-led training, virtual instructor-led training, and now back to regular ILT. So we're at ELB, what we're doing is we usually support people and help them build out those experiences. And we're seeing this more and more and more. For a long time, it was all VILT, e-learning, and now all of a sudden we're coming back and we're getting a lot of requests for ILT. So what I wanted to talk about today was just in this ever-changing, uncertain, and sometimes super fast-paced world, how we can make on-site training effective, because things are changing a lot and we need to maybe take a step back and figure out how we can not only get people to be engaged in the experience when they're there, but also to get them to maybe even want to come in the first place. So one thing that I just want to think about is that as we move from VILT to ILT, we're very typically focused on what we're going to do from the learning perspective. What are our performance goals? What content? What assessment are we going to use? And that's all important, but sometimes we forget about the ecosystem that we're dropping this training into. So I want us to stop for a minute and kind of step back and think about our target audience. These are the people that we want to come in, that we want to overcome resistance and come to willing to learn. And the fact is that more Americans are working remotely now than they were before the pandemic, but we're also kind of moving back into this hybrid work environment. So with that in mind, I wanted to just start with a really quick poll to see where everybody here is at, just as far as where do you work? Let's see if that pops up. There we go. So I'm just curious. I have numbers as to what the actual work environment is out there right now, but I'm curious to see how this group matches that environment. So do you work fully remote, mostly in the office, or in the office?
All right,
I'll
and
give
the
you a minute.
responses are coming in. We have almost a 3/4 of you who've answered, so I'll just give it a few more seconds. Very interesting numbers. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share out the results.
Okay, that's cool. So it's 52% fully remote, 30% mostly remote, 14% mostly in the office, and 4% in the office. So it's interesting because the numbers that we see out there right now, the most recent numbers I looked at were from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. They were saying that 20% of people work from home. And more people who work in management, 33% work from home. So it's just kind of fun to look at this because we can look at trends and we can see what job roles and age groups tend to work in the office more or less. But as you can see here, those don't matter. What really matters is who your target audience is. So as we're talking this through, you're going to see that that's something that I kind of keep coming back to, is the idea that the trends are important to know, but what's really important is knowing your target audience. So as we get into this, we're going to look at things like whether or not your employees might want to have to come in for a training event because maybe they are hybrid and they have certain days that they come in, and now you're asking them to come in on a day that's different and they're not really thrilled about that. Or maybe they don't know what to expect from this experience, so that can make them anxious. So these are all the kinds of things that we want to try to overcome a little bit and help them to come to training with an open mind and a willingness to learn. So here are the main guidelines that we're going to talk through a little bit today. We're going to talk about communicating early and often, building a community, taking a hybrid approach, accommodating individual differences, and investing in your instructors. So I heard about this on a podcast once before, but it was about writing for TV shows and how sometimes you have a bunch of ideas in the writer's room and some of those ideas work really well and some of those ideas are really great, but they don't really work right now. So you put them in the candy bag and maybe you come back to them for later. So what I'd like to do when I'm presenting this to you today is have you kind of think about that as your candy bag. So ultimately, we're all just trying to find the right balance and the right balance of things that will work for our learners. So there are going to be some things here that you can use right away that you think are going to be great. There might be some things here that you put in your candy bag. But basically, it's all just going to be based on how things work with your target audience and knowing them really well. And that's actually where we're going to start, is getting to know your target audience. And I'm going to start basically by saying, when was the last time that you checked your phone or your email or your Slack? And maybe you're checking it right now because we all tend to multitask, right? But the idea is that we're all used to having that information at our fingertips. And that's especially important to people who are younger, who are in Gen Z. And they were born in late 1990s and early 2010s. Some of you might be on this call, but typically these people may be college interns, they might be recent graduates, they might be just getting into the workforce. This might be their first experience with working in an office. So their most recent experience with any sort of on-site instructor-led courses might actually have been in a high school or a college classroom. So they don't really know what to expect at all from these types of experiences. And even if they do come into the office, if they're not working hybrid, there might still be opportunities that they're missing out on, that they are not receiving mentoring from older employees who are working from home. So all of us are kind of in this situation where we're used to having information at our fingertips, especially when we don't really know what to expect. And anyone in your organization is going to have these questions, whether they're younger, whether they're older, especially if they're having issues with mergers, acquisitions, layoffs, new technology, new organizational structures. So what I'd like you to think about, and this is kind of setting up this whole thing, is using your on-site training as an opportunity to help fill in some of these gaps. So you now can be the person who starts to bridge some of these communication gaps. That will give people a little bit more confidence to come in and make them a little bit less resistant because now they know what they're coming in for. So it's kind of a two-step process, right? So first you need to know what they need. You need to listen to their concerns. And giving employees a voice will show them that you kind of respect and show that you care. And when people feel respected and feel cared about, it promotes engagement. It also helps them feel like they're important to you, which can build a sense of connection. And then this feeling of connection and respect can strengthen their sense of ownership. And then that can make them more likely to participate. So this is just from listening, right? You can listen through polls or surveys, through one-on-one check-ins. You can talk to managers. That's one step away from people, but it still can give you some feedback that you need. But what's really important is that this isn't just helping build trust with your learners. It's also helping you do what is really important in your learning and development process, which is analysis. So sometimes we talk about analysis and it feels like this big amorphous thing that's hard to define. There might be some crazy methodology that we don't understand, but really needs analysis and analysis of learning is just turning a critical eye towards what you already have, whether that be your content and your metrics or your environment, making observations, and then asking lots of questions to validate or fill in gaps. That's this communication, this listening to needs, because that process of asking good probing questions not only helps you kind of recognize where your learners are and what they need in order to come and engage in this experience, but it also lets you understand where the gaps are and what types of things you might need to teach better when they actually do come in. And once they come in and they are learning the things that they need, as opposed to the things that you thought they might need to know, you're more likely to get a good, effective training experience out of that. One of the things, just kind of as an example of this listening to needs, if you, let's say that you're creating sales training and you've noticed that sales are down and you think, okay, I'm going to include lots of training about prospecting, lots of training about social selling. But when you talk to salespeople, you learn that they're actually having a really hard time differentiating your products from the competition. So then you decide maybe, okay, I need to kind of include some product demos. I need to talk more about communicating advantages and strengths. You might even decide that you need some job aids. So those kinds of things come out when you start listening to their needs, better about what they need to learn as opposed to what you thought they might need to know. And then I'm going to go to the next step. Once you've kind of listened to them through all these different varieties of ways, you want to share that information. So what's really important is that people feel less anxious about coming to your experience if they know what to expect. So the big things here that I think about are communicate, clarify, and adjust. So communicate involves sharing the agenda and your expectations a few days before the training begins. Sometimes we hold that a little bit close to our heart because we don't want a lot of questions or last minute feedback on what we're doing. So you don't have to provide them with every single detail of what you're going to do during that training session, but at least kind of let them know when it's going to start, when it's going to end, if they're going to have a break. Give them some sense of how that will flow or what they might need to know in order to be prepared once they get there. Then clarify. So you do have to be prepared for some questions. So I would always let them know that there's a contact person or a Slack channel or some sort of manageable way to clarify any misunderstandings or answer any last minute questions that come up. And then adjust. So once you've communicated and clarified, that's not the end, right? We need to now adjust. So during the training event, you want to check in with trainees, make any adjustments that might be needed. So for example, let's say you're having trouble with people participating. Maybe you just need to schedule activities at a different time of day. Maybe the group of people that you have is a little bit more alert in the morning, or maybe the activity itself needs a little bit more structure. And those are the kinds of things that you can kind of adjust a little bit on the fly as you go along, or if you can't adjust it on the fly, you can take notes and then continually iterate on it in future offerings. So I have a quick discussion question before I go to the next slide. It's just that part of this is informed by the fact that I just came back from an on-site training event and I hadn't been to one in quite a long time. And I was really surprised about the types of things that I wanted to know ahead of time. So I thought it would be kind of fun just to put into the chat some of your ideas about what types of things you would want to know before you went to a training event. Are there certain things that you would really want somebody to tell you that would help set you up and make you more comfortable about attending that event? Yes. What's the attire? That's a big question. Yep. What's in it for me? Yep. What prep needs to be done first? How long will it be? Yes. What skills? Is there pre-work? Who else will be there? That's a great question. Yeah. And I'm going to flip it as you guys are chatting in there. These are some of the things that I had come up with as well. So you can see the attire is one of the things we often hear is you can wear business casual clothes, but what does that even mean? It means something different in different organizations. I love that. How will I take this back to my team to build them? that's a wonderful, especially from like a leadership and a management perspective for training. I think that that's a great thing to ask. So these basically, when you're thinking about communication, there's these two pieces of it that you really want to focus on. And that is, what do my learners need? And then how can I anticipate those needs? And where is the intersection? And how much can I communicate with them ahead of time about this? So just to kind of summarize the idea that really when we're talking about bringing people back into the office, we want to just help ease the runway in, right? And ease the runway into these ILTs and take that role of understanding that we're not only there to support their learning, but we're also trying to put them in the mindset to learn. And by doing that, if we can prepare them a little bit, it will be much more effective. So the next tip is to build a community. And this is the sense of community. I don't know if you've read about it, seen it. I feel like it pops up a lot in all sorts of different venues, but the idea that people are missing community, that they're feeling isolated. This is another reason why ILT is becoming so popular again. So again, we have a poll, and this is just your personal opinion. What is the best thing for you about working in the office? I know most of us are remote, but if you were to go into the office, or if you have been in the office in the past, what is the best thing about that experience?
All right, so you see the poll in front of you. I'm going to give you a few minutes there to complete the poll. And as you can see, there's a lot of different selections there. If you don't see them all and you have a scroll bar, go ahead and scroll down because there is 1, 2, 6 answers. So you may want to see the all of the responses if you're not seeing them all. All right, we have nearly 70% of you who have answered. So I'm going to just give it a couple of more seconds. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share out the results.
Cool. Socializing with work friends. I'm going to show you, because this is a little bit similar to an article that we did on the Harvard Business Review. That went away quick, but you can see that socializing with coworkers was at the top. And that is one of the things that people found that was at the top. These are pretty much in line with the ways that people feel and the reasons that they want to come back into the office. And that's the thing that I have noticed. I've worked remote for a good chunk of the last, dare I tell you, 20 years. And it's always a little bit of an effort for me to come back in, right? But whenever I do, it's always really helpful to realize how energized you can get just by being around other people. Yeah, can we see our poll results? Is it gone? Is there a way to show it again?
Yeah,
Or
let me give that. Hold on a second. So there you go. You should be able to see them again now. I did close it really quickly because you went to a different slide and I didn't want that
yeah.
to obscure it. So
Oh,
those are
thank
the
you. That's
yeah.
okay.
Can so hopefully everyone can see those results now.
Yeah. And those are fairly in line with what the business review found as well, and what we've been hearing. I think that the general gist, and I'll go ahead. The idea that casual face-to-face interactions, they're more than just a way to reduce isolation and build community, although that's important. They also, we saw on there some networking, right? They also lead to career development opportunities and greater company loyalty. And those kinds of things can be really difficult to do in a remote environment. Face-to-face meetings, you can read body language and nonverbal communication, which can make it a lot easier to communicate. Seeing the person in front of you and how they are reacting can make it easier to adjust your approach. For example, I can't see any of you right now. You could all be completely rolling your eyes and I would not know it, and I would just keep moving ahead the way that I am. But if you are in person, you can start to adjust your approach. You can also work through misunderstandings. You can listen, respond, de-escalate much more effectively. There's also fewer technical problems. People, I think we all have been in a situation where you've inadvertently interrupted or talked over someone in a meeting, or just sat in silence because nobody knew how to talk first or who should talk first. So those virtual meetings can have a really choppy flow, and that can make it really difficult to communicate online. Fewer distractions. That's the other big thing about in person. You know, most of us are probably guilty of multitasking when we're in a meeting that we don't feel engaged in. But the more we multitask, the less we're engaged. So it kind of becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Where we're just kind of going around in circles. So all of these things make face-to-face meetings a better way to build trust and develop strong, lasting business relationships. The training that I mentioned earlier, I was really reluctant to go. I didn't want to, leave my comfort zone. I didn't want to not have enough time to read my book because I need that quiet time. But what was really great to me was being with all those people and seeing them, all of a sudden we had a shared experience that we could talk about. It gave us something to do out of our everyday project work. And then whenever I'm getting frustrated or if I don't really understand things are going, I remember that personal connection. And it reminds me that there's somebody on the other side, a human on the other side of that Slack message, right? Um, it can also be super helpful to junior employees because they, in addition to just not being able to pick up on some of the things that we instinctively learn or know after working somewhere for a while, they also might have trouble building those personal bonds with their manager. So they often don't get as much feedback as the people who work in the office. And it's not because of lack of concern or because of lack of care, but maybe their coworkers or managers just aren't there at the same time as they are. And then also the tone of like a Slack or an email message can be really hard to read. So a manager might want to wait until they can talk to that person in person in order to deliver that feedback. And it can be difficult to find the right time or place to do that. So all of these reasons are reasons why it's just important to have that face-to-face connection. Now, how does that all, that's great, right? But how does that translate to ILT? Like I get that people can have face-to-face meetings and that's important. Um, so I think one of the things that we really want to talk about when it comes to ILT is using ILT as an opportunity to do some of these things that they might not be able to do if they are working hybrid, if they are working remote, if they are working separately from their managers. So if you can promote ILT as opportunities to do some of these things, you can really help build these connections that are harder to build. So for example, small group practice, there's a couple different ways that you can structure these. Peer groups, one of the things that happens in a work environment is that you often form a loose tie with somebody who might help you out with something. Not somebody that you work with every single day, but somebody who maybe answers a question that helps you get out of a jam. And now you have that loose tie with that person, and that's another connection. You can create peer groups of small group practice in your session that help to start to build some of those loose ties that are harder to build if you're not in the office every day. You can also use small group practice as an opportunity for small group work with a manager and coworkers. So these can then become a small team building exercise. So instead of just thinking about randomly pairing people, maybe you have certain activities where they pair in their groups, you bring the manager in. The manager then can either observe or participate, start to see how people work together and how they respond to feedback. And then that makes them more comfortable providing that feedback when they do get back to the workplace. Um, Hands-on skill building, this can take a whole lot of different forms based on whether you're trying to teach people how to use a system, whether you're trying to teach people soft skills, however, whatever they might need to do their job. But the idea is that by making time for these activities in person, instead of having self-paced learning or breakout rooms or things like that, can be really valuable because then you can give them more timely and personalized feedback instead of just trying to either not seeing them and just hoping that they understand from the feedback that you put that is supposed to generically apply to everybody. You can also schedule short informal networking sessions. Maybe you don't call them a networking session if you don't want to, but even something like a coffee break where people just casually have an opportunity to meet and talk to other people they don't see every day in a way that feels comfortable. Um, and I would just recommend going back to the first part where we're talking about communicating and understanding the needs of your audience. That's really important here because you want to pick an activity that will appeal to the people that you're talking to. So you might have a group of people that really, really would work well, and who would love to have a game night. And that would be a great informal networking session or a game afternoon, right? If it's just a day activity. And then other people just might not like that idea at all and might just want a coffee break. So really that's where you kind of, when you start to structure these, you start to learn about what people are interested in and what they want, and then also the environment that you could put that in, that they might be willing to come to it. Um, Social gatherings the same way. It's just something that you would really want to tailor to your audience. Just a little bit different than networking. You would just set the scene slightly different. So it's just more of an opportunity to be fun and casual, as opposed to maybe actually talking to people about what they do or how they work. Um, and then finally, I would just say to establish communication channels so that learners can continue to interact with and support each other even after the training is complete. So often we're very focused on what's happening right now in the training, and we want to get through the training. But we also, if we're going to be taking the time to build community during that training, then we should probably also build in the opportunity for those people to stay connected in an easier way once the training is complete. So I have another poll, and this one is again to put you in the learner's shoes. And I want you to imagine that you're the learner looking over the agenda for today's in quotes, ILT session. I want you to tell me what your least favorite activity is.
All right, you should be seeing the poll now. And of course, if you have a scroll bar, there are more answers. But if you would choose your least favorite activity, and we're getting some interesting responses. Oh, very interesting. So I guess we can assume the lower the number, the more favorite the activity is.
Yes, we'll have to do a little bit of math, but I think you're right.
All right, so I'm going to give you a few more seconds. All right, here we go. I'm going to end the poll and share out the results. There we go.
Oh, okay. I'm with y'all because role play is my least favorite, but I always make people do it because I think it's important, and when it's structured well, it can be a really effective activity. Lecture, um, also agree. And networking small. Interesting. Oh, and we have some people who love them all. So I'm not really asking this. Well, I was asking it because I was curious, but I'm not really asking it because I think any of those answers are right or wrong. But I just want you to remember that no learning experience is perfect. So we've just talked about all these community building activities, and especially when you have like a mixture of extroverts and introverts and people who like this and people who don't like this, there's always going to be a small segment of people who aren't really thrilled about that activity that you set up for them. There's always going to be a little bit of discomfort. But what I really want you to focus on is building a community where people feel supported and able to move past their initial resistance to participate in a meaningful way. This is part of the reason that maybe sharing the agenda ahead of time is helpful, because maybe they see that there's a role play, but there's other things around it that they're totally comfortable with. It might just be that as the facilitator, you nod to it, you say, God, yeah, I know I don't really like this so much either, but I'm going to tell you why it's important. And I'm going to tell you that if you get into a role play and I give you a script and I help you guide through it, it's going to be so much easier when you actually have to do that with a person on a call or with a person that you're mentoring, or however you want to do that. So that's basically the point of this, is just to remember it's never going to be perfect, but you want to make sure that you're using the right activity to support the learning objective that you want. And that as you go in to build that community, that you also need to foster that sense of community in the way that you present it to the group and help them to get involved and engaged and maybe move past that initial discomfort. So we're about halfway. I just wanted to stop quickly and find out if there were any immediate questions that I needed to answer, and then we can keep going with the
Sure.
rest of the presentation.
There was one question about what kind of communication channels, if you could give some examples.
So one of the big ones that I've seen frequently whether it be Slack or Teams or having just a digital channel like that that is set up. Um, I've also seen, it really depends on what the technical infrastructure is that your company has. So I would work for there. I have also seen people set up in their learning management system, kind of a social center where people can post messages and questions and things like that. Um, I've also seen groups that almost set up a type of blog where people will post messages. I've seen TikTok videos, photos. One group that we worked with actually would do the training, and then they would have people post photos. It was a makeup company. Um, they would do the training, and then they would have people post photos of the first customers that they worked on that they had tried out that new technique on that customer or the best customer that they had worked on. So there's a lot of different ways you can bring in, just the traditional kind of communication channels that you would use day to day on the job, but you can also kind of lean into some of these other technologies that we're used to using every single day, whether it be photos or videos or just chat, social groups, uh, and those kinds of things. Does that answer the question?
Well, we can see if someone, if the person who asked the question, if you have any further follow-up, go ahead and type it in chat. And there's a couple of people who've added the two communications they use are things like Monday.com and Reiki.
Yeah.
I guess that's how you pronounce it. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yep. It also allow project management. Yeah, that's a good way to do it as well. And that kind of also jumps into this next point of discussion, right? So it's this idea of taking a hybrid approach. So, and one thing that I want to, when we're told that we now need to have an instructor-led training, we're like, okay, now I'm going to do this whole instructor-led training course. But really, it's very rarely that we're switching all the way over. Sometimes we still have some people in our cohort that are virtual. So you might actually be training people who are here and there. I've also seen people who have a percentage of people who come in and a percentage of people who are trained virtually. And then I'll move on to the next slide. You can also just think about the idea of the fact that within the ILT, you can have a variety of experiences that make it more engaging. So just, I kind of laugh about this, but it's like a balanced diet, right? You can't, if ILT is a carrot and you're only eating carrots all day long, you're just not going to have the full experience. You want to make sure that you have a variety of different things to really give you what you need for all the different vitamins and nutrients that you need. So you can use a combination of modalities to help learners gradually build knowledge. I very often in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking three touches, three touches, three touches, which is kind of like you introduce it, which might actually be very often through a self-paced kind of experience or pre-work, as somebody mentioned, if there's pre-work that would be done ahead of time. So self-paced pre-work, that is kind of your first touch. I don't expect people to be an expert or to know a lot from that when they first come in. I just want them to kind of start to see start to sketch, build the outline of the puzzle, just kind of get some idea for the container that everything is going to come in. And then the second touch might be in the facilitated session where we're doing a lot of practice of that thing that we learned about in a self-paced sort of way. And then the last touch might be the assessment. And I know that we think of assessment as the way that we're measuring learning, but assessment can also be the way that we're measuring, for lack of a better way of saying it, not learning, and what we then need to either improve in our training for the future or maybe come back and remediate, because ultimately we want people to succeed. So if they aren't doing well on the assessment, it could be that there's something that we're not doing well at the beginning that we need to improve. It could be that they need a little bit of help. So those are kind of my three touches that I'm always trying to think of. Is there any way that I can hit you three times? Well, gently, and make sure that you know what you need to know. Um, The reason that a variety of training activities was really helpful is that our brains are attracted to novelty. That's what gets us to pay attention. So you're more likely to notice things that are different and new than you are just to have the same repetitive experience all the way through. So once you have those moments of novelty, you're more likely to remember what you learned and what soon followed what you just saw. And also, when we experience the same content in different ways, it helps us create new and different pathways to that information in our brains. So it's easier to find it later. I also really, whenever I can, I look at ways of using everyday technology. So making an effort to make training look like what the technology we use in our everyday life. So for example, our phone, we obviously don't necessarily want people texting on there the whole time during the ILT, but you can use the phone. Like you can use it to play learning games. You can use it, maybe you have somebody record themselves doing a role play, either answering a question or practicing an elevator pitch, or maybe you ask them to decide how they might respond to a scenario and then quickly record that and then send that back. And all of those recordings can be sent maybe to you or maybe back to their manager. And here we are building that community again, right? So if you have them kind of take some time to record that during the session, they get comfortable with it. When they're comfortable with it, they can then send that off to their manager to look at and review and provide feedback. So now you're kind of, again, thinking about ways that you can take what they're learning here and bring it a little bit outside of this space and start to build a community around it. I also love to look for moments of entertainment. So sometimes maybe at the event, you might have people taking pictures or taking video. And then at the end of each day or at the beginning of the next day, you might just flash some of those videos of people at the event or photos of people at the event. You might even have before the event, if you can talk, again, we were talking about talking to people, if you can talk to people who've been on the job for a while, who maybe can film some sort of video, you know, with their phone that you can show. It doesn't have to be super high fidelity. You can then have them kind of welcome or greet people and say, "Oh my gosh, I was you a year ago. If only I had known then what I know now. Here's a tip." Tips from people who've been there for a while usually are super helpful. People like that a lot. So anything like that that you can kind of think about of presenting that, creating that environment of mutual support is really great, especially when you can integrate some entertainment with it. So these are some of the things that we just talked about already, but there are some modalities and tools that we can use. So we're talking about self-paced e-learning modules and videos, poll interactions. We're doing it here kind of for fun because I kind of like to gauge where you all are and what you like and what you don't like. You can do the same kind of thing in your ILTs. Again, leveraging the phones if you can. Um, I have a quick game for everybody to play in just a second. And video-based role play, that's kind of like what I was talking about before. At ELB, we have a tool where you can actually support that and get feedback from your managers directly. Collaborative document editing. So you could put up a document and actually have people working in it together. And small group work practice and reflection. I do have a thought on that because that kind of ties back into the role plays and how to make them more effective. But first, what I wanted to do is give you an opportunity to play a game. I'm going to put this in the chat.
I can also put it in the chat too. So let me
Okay.
put that in. Oh, I don't want to have that extra. There we go. There you go. So if you want to click on that link in the chat, that'll take you to the noodle here.
A little noodle game. And there's 3 quick puzzles in there. Um, and as you're noodling on that, I'll talk just, I'll give you a minute. I'll give you maybe a minute to noodle. And then I'll come back and wrap up a little bit with the role plays and move on to the next thing. Oh, IT won't allow the link. Okay.
Yeah, it might be external to people, so they're not allowed to do that. And then
So what I can do is, as you all are playing or not playing, I'll talk a little bit about the role play and move on to the next thing. You can also just bookmark this and play it later. It's not, nothing in here is going to impact your ability to listen to the rest of the webinar. But I just wanted to give you an example of a way that you can play a game, maybe during the session, just to review some of the points that you've already learned. Get back into that mental, get one of those touches out of the way, right? So you can kind of remember what you learned, what you did, remember some key points, and then move on to the next thing. It gives everybody kind of a little bit of a brain break, a little way to think of something slightly differently. The basic thing that I just wanted to mention about building this small group work practice, reflection, and all of that is that sometimes when we are building out the facilitator guide, we're in such a hurry that we're just trying to get our points down, and we don't always include enough structure for role plays or group work. So when I think structure, I think things like bullet points or character profiles or something to introduce it. And then also some sort of, if not directly a performance rubric, but some sort of goals for making sure that they've achieved what they need to achieve, or some sort of checklist that they need to follow in order to process it. Because when you're thrown into a role play, and especially when you're thrown into a role play with people you don't know, and you have to make everything up as you go along, there's a lot of cognitive load that can come along with that. So now all of a sudden you're trying to meet somebody, you're trying to be clever and make something up as you go along, and you're trying to accomplish the goal of the role play or the small group work. And that can be a lot. So the more structure you can provide for those activities, so that people don't have to worry about the road that they're traveling. They just have to worry about making sure they're driving on that road correctly. That can really help, and that can help make the role plays a little bit more comfortable and a little bit less discomfort, because there's only one thing now that you have to focus on instead of three or four.
All right. I think we'll move on. If everyone has that link there, they can certainly play the games after the session.
Yep. Okay. So the next step, or tip 4, is accommodating individual differences. And when I talk about individual differences, I'm talking about how we're all psychologically different from each other and how we might have different learning needs. I'm not really talking about learning styles. That is something that's kind of been debunked, which doesn't mean that we all don't have our preferences for learning in different ways, but that we are really more adaptable than that. So this is, just to put it into context, this is less about adjusting to different learning styles and more just about understanding different learning needs. So these are just some of the things that we would want to think about when we're accommodating individual differences. We talked a little bit earlier about how a lot of employees, especially younger people, might not be sure what to expect during ILT. And when I say younger, I mean people who just haven't ever been in an ILT session before because they're coming in and they're newer on the job. But generally, what's really fascinating to me is that what a lot of the research is showing from people as they come in to the workforce now is that what they're really looking for is empathetic leadership that prioritizes mental well-being and a culture of wellness. And this might be something that's being driven by our younger generation, but it's something that we can all benefit from. So I think it's something that we should all really take to heart and try to create a learning experience that is inclusive and accessible, because not only does this make everybody more comfortable and maybe more willing to attend this ILT session, but it also sends a signal that you share their values. And that can do a lot as far as making people feel like they made the right choice to come work for you and to be in that organization with you. Some things to think about here include creating an inclusive space. So this is both culturally inclusive and also inclusive design. So with the technology, being inclusive that way, I think it's important to remember that anybody can be excluded. We just saw it. I posted a link to a game and somebody's IT excluded them from being able to use that. So we really need to be able to think about different ways. If that were to happen during a learning session, how would we then troubleshoot that situation and help them without slowing down the flow of the rest of the presentation? How can we make sure that they can also get access to that information? So that's something, if I do this webinar again, I'm going to have to think about a better way to make sure that what I will do if somebody cannot access the game that I put in the chat. We also want to think about making it accessible. So this is removing barriers, providing multiple options for learning, promoting inclusivity. And I think if you've been doing a lot of online, web-based learning, self apps, whatever you want to say, you might be familiar with the WCAG guidelines, the accessibility guidelines. You might be in front of a classroom, but you still need to think about those things, right? So think about different ways that you might need to accommodate different people. And then also making sure that we engage learners at their own level. So this is ways that we've already talked about providing a variety of different instructional activities so that we can keep different personalities and different learners engaged. But you also want to think about how you're going to handle different resources, how you're going to handle different assessment methods. Um, and if you can make an effort to engage students at their own level, then you're going to they're going to feel more confident, they're going to feel more competent, and they're going to be more comfortable actively participating. So again, this is something I can't give you a blanket answer for how to engage learners at their own level. But what I can tell you is that if you learn more about your learners and who they are and where they are coming from, you'll start to get some ideas that you can then integrate into your training that will reflect what those people need. And you'll understand the places where you really need to lean in and make sure that you have multiple um, formats, multiple ways of presenting the information. And that's the way that you're going to make this feel like a more accommodating experience. The last thing that I have on here is allowing time to pause and recharge. So I really wanted to quickly ask how often you add breaks to your agenda. Yeah, I think we have enough time to do this one, this poll. So how often do you add breaks to your agenda?
All right, so everyone should be seeing that poll now. Interesting answers coming through. And almost 70% of you have voted. So we'll see how many people. All right. Gonna give it just a few more seconds. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and end and share out our results.
Okay. This is actually, this is about what I would have guessed. I like that some people said breaks. Who needs breaks? But this is about typically, this is how I've seen it in most of the facilitators I've got guides I've looked at. I usually aim for putting in breaks once every 2 hours. But again, it depends on your audience. It depends on on how everything is set up, what you're teaching. Um, and I just think really what's important to just mention here, what I'm going to just tie it into, is just the idea is that when we're talking about breaks and putting breaks into the agenda, really people are feeling burnt out in general. I think that's something that has been a trend that has come up a lot and that you've probably seen. 42% of the global workforce reports burnout. So when we're creating breaks, what we're really creating are touch points because it can be just as easy to get burned out in an ILT session, maybe not at the same scale as being burned out at work, but you can get burned out in an ILT session. You can get cognitive overload. You can have too much time that you've spent with people and you just need to get away. So what breaks do in our agenda is they give us the opportunity to stop for a minute, to check in with our audience, to see how things are going, to see if we need to speed up or slow down. We might ask them if they want to take a break and they might say, yes, please, you should have asked me 15 minutes ago. Or they might say, I'm totally fine to keep going. So just using breaks, not only as a literal break, but also as a touch point for the facilitator are really, really important. Okay. So here are here are some guidelines for presenting a more inclusive experience, planning for accommodations. I won't read them because I know that you all can read. But I think the most important thing is just making sure that you have a plan so that people know not only that you're making those accommodations, but also who they contact if they need an accommodation, and giving them enough time to do so. Because you can create a whole set of reasons and support systems in place, but if nobody knows about it, it's not really there. So make sure that you make a plan, that you talk to people and get input from different areas so that you have a diverse points of view that can provide you maybe with some insight into things you didn't realize. I usually try to integrate some time for self-paced learning too, because not only does that give people who might need a different format of learning, it also maybe gives time for the instructor to check in with people one-on-one that would be kind of awkward to do in the full group setting. The last point that I'm going to go over really quick is just the fact that we all need to invest in our instructors. So basically, when we're shifting, we shifted from ILT to VILT, and now we're telling instructors now. So a lot of them have invested a lot of time in coming up with the skills that they need in order to teach effectively virtually. And now we're coming back. Now, there's a couple of things that happen there. First of all, we want to make sure that we're not giving them whiplash by making them move around too quickly back and forth. But we also want to make sure that they have the tools that they need to succeed. Because if we're doing some of these things that came up earlier, if we're listening to people's needs, if we're communicating and trying to set a sense of community in the classroom, if we're trying to use different varieties of modalities and different ways of engaging students, these might be different mindsets, perspectives, and tools that they need to learn how to use. So we want to not only communicate those expectations, but we want to give them the support resources that they need. We want to train them. But I provide a venue directory or map because we have to remember this is going to be a physical setting now, and maybe they haven't been here before. So if somebody needs to go and get some food or needs to take a bio break, they need to be able to tell people where to go. And then the other thing that I think is really important is to just set up that sense that this is a space for continual improvement. When I have done some work with the game agency and other groups like that, one of the things that I really was fortunate to do was work with game designers. Game designers don't submit a document for review. I mean, they sort of do, but really what they do is they play test. So that's the way that I like to think of this now. If we can set up an environment that is a little bit more, that makes us a less afraid of doing the wrong thing and more like the feedback that we get helps us to improve and get better and make it a better experience. I think the better we are at eventually coming to a point where we're building ILT experiences that people want to come to. So kind of come to it with that idea that these feedback sessions aren't to find out what you're doing wrong, but they're to help you understand how you can continually improve it and get more people to want to come and be ready to learn once they get there. So we only have a few minutes left, and I want to make sure that if there's any questions, there's time for those. Um, so
Yeah, so there is just a couple of questions. And one of the questions has to do is how do you drive engagement in hybrid sessions?
so I think one of the things in a hybrid session that I would really focus on is if you can do it, making sure that you have another person there to help you monitor that separate audience. And I don't mean monitor, like make sure that they aren't checking their phones, right? But similar to what we're doing here in this webinar, I'm kind of doing the leading and the teaching and the talking, but I have somebody here who's on the side who can help me like respond to the chat. I've done games before too, where you can have a game that can be played just as easily by the people in the room as it can in the chat, and then everybody can kind of participate. So I think really having somebody there to help moderate, but also creating some of these tools and creating just that sense that the people who are on the other side still have a voice and still can participate and still can ask questions. I think just, if for lack of a better word, just remembering that they're there, right? And having somebody there who can filter that information to you, that tends to be what is going to drive it a little bit better, um, so that
Okay.
they really feel like part of the group.
All right. Thank you for that. And then what was the one word answer to the question, our brains are attracted to different activities because?
Oh, novelty.
There you go, novelty. So that's the word of the day, I guess, is novelty. Another question, how do blended course concepts help to overcome the bridge?
The bridge from VILT to ILT?
I'm assuming that's what the questioner is asking. They can type in chat if that's exactly what they were asking, but I'm assuming. So if you could help us understand that. Yes, it is.
Yeah. So I think that blended really, really helps because you are providing more of a structure for people to maybe not give up 100% of what they have right now. So if they are used to working hybrid and you can kind of mimic that in the learning experience that you give to them, you might help to impact some of their reticence to maybe come because you've now kind of modeled this in a way that fits them. I would say also when it comes to using blended to overcome that, you can maybe create experiences that help them see how some of these community building activities that they have done in ILT can be supported, if not in exactly the same way in that blended environment. So you can now have a way of modeling some of these ideas in in a virtual space, even though you're also having them come in and learn how to do that in an ILT. So it's almost like backwards, right? It's almost like we're used to kind of teaching somebody and then role playing it, and then they go out. We're almost doing that in a blended experience. You can kind of teach them how to do some of these things in ILT and then model how you might do that in the more virtual way once they go back to their hybrid work environment.
All right, thank you for that. And there's a couple of comments that I found in Q&A. There's a couple of things. So a Teams channel is great for tying up loose ends, especially after training. And that someone always sends out MS Forms survey after training to see what the learners liked and what we can improve upon. They always gain something from that. Another comment, also, having two instructors to go over content is a great way to mix it up. Listening one person all
Mhm.
day can be a little mentally taxing. So there was those comments.
Those are great. Thank you. I agree with
Yeah.
all of those.
All right. Well, actually, we have come to our end of time, and I just want to come back on camera and thank everyone for being here, for spending your time with us, and thanks to Carrie Wiser for that wonderful presentation and in getting us thinking about how we would go from VILT to ILT once again. So this has been recorded, and you'll receive the recording via email. It'll also be in the online it'll be in the sponsored library for the Learning Guild. So with that, I'm going to thank Carrie. I'm going to thank ELB Learning, who is the sponsor of this webinar. And I want to thank you for spending your time with us. So goodbye, everybody, and have a good rest of your day.